get that recording going. Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Kyle White. I'm the Director of Education here at Co-operatives First, and I'm joined by my colleague, Cathy Edwards, who's going to be leading us through today's presentation. Some of you have probably worked with Cooperatives First in the past, but for those who aren't familiar with Cooperatives First, we're a nonprofit that's based out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and we work across Western Canada, the 4 Western Canadian provinces. Our mandate is to raise awareness of cooperatives and support entrepreneurs who are seeking to start cooperative businesses. Our organization is fully funded by Federated Cooperatives Limited and the Cooperative Retailing System, and because of their contributions, we're able to offer our supports for free. Since being created in 2016, Cooperatives First has helped create 115 new cooperative businesses. And since we've got folks from all across Canada, I'd love to do a round of introductions, but I think we're up to 50 folks, so we don't quite have the time for that. If you could, in the chat, let us know your name, where you're joining us from, and what you do for a living. So just in the chat, give us a quick introduction to yourself. And just a few housekeeping items. During the webinar, please remain muted. That'll prevent any background noise disrupting the session. I may mute you as we work through the presentation, just to again ensure there's no disruptions. If you have any questions during Cathy's presentation, please feel free, add them to the chat. We will have a question and answer session at the end, and you can certainly save your question and ask it then, but if you get it into the chat, we'll ensure that those get asked. And we are recording today's session, and I'll email that recording to everybody who signed up for today's session, and feel free to share that with your network if you'd like to spread it around. Next, I'd like to begin our webinar in a good way by acknowledging that we are located, Cooperatives First is located on Treaty 6 territory, home of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. We acknowledge that this land was not ceded, but that the purpose of the treaties was to ensure the land would be shared. We are joined in this webinar by people from all across Turtle Island, so I invite you to acknowledge the peoples and the ancestors of the place that you call home. Indigenous peoples have been cooperating in these territories for thousands of years, and it is through cooperation that all our communities continue to thrive. Next, I would like to introduce my colleague, Cathy, who's going to be delivering our presentation today. Cathy is a serial entrepreneur from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. She holds a Bachelor of Commerce degree from the University of Saskatchewan and a law degree from the University of Calgary. She's worked professionally in large corporate environments, clerked for the Courts of Queen's Bench and the Appeal for Province of Alberta, and has practiced at notable law firms throughout Alberta and Saskatchewan. Cathy left private practice to pursue entrepreneurial ventures and hasn't looked back. She has a passion for startups and has successfully launched and managed several ventures, including a nonprofit cooperative, Heart-Linked Community Service Co-op. She also supports startups at Cooperatives First through coaching and business planning, and joined the team as a part-time entrepreneur in residence in 2022. Cathy was awarded the YWCA Woman of Distinction Award for Entrepreneurship in 2023 and is heading up Cooperatives First project to assist the expansion of affordable childcare in rural and Indigenous communities. Cathy, over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Kyle, and thank you for starting off the meeting in a good way with the land acknowledgement. I'm really excited to be presenting this material with you today. I'm going to share my screen, and particularly I wanted to welcome any cooperatives that are here that I've worked with before, and I'd love to dive in. So one of my favorite phrases relates to financing, and it's that a bank is a place that will lend you money if you can prove that you don't need it. And I think that's why grants are so appealing to so many of us. But I want to impart to you that when you're pursuing grant applications, you have to take the same approach as if you are applying for financing. So there is a great deal of preparation and support that goes into a successful grant application. For today's agenda, I want to touch on 5 key elements or criteria that will support a good grant application. Number 1 is fitting in the box or discussing grant eligibility. A second important context is to identify the key mandate of the grant, not only with the grant, but also what your organization is all about and how to ensure a good fit. The rules of engagement, and that's really about how to set yourself apart from the crowd. The preparation that I recommend you undertake when pursuing granting or grant writing. And last but not least, I have a few key granting programs that I want to touch on and highlight. I know we have folks from across the country joining us on this webinar today. I do have some national granting programs, but I also have some examples from Saskatchewan that you could correlate to your own province as necessary. So within the first topic of fitting in the box, what may seem relatively high level, but really important to consider are eligibility criteria. So understanding your organization or your cooperative's organizational structure is very, very important. And of course, the 3 key distinctions are for-profit, not-for-profit, or charities. So it may seem obvious, but the goal or an organization that is for-profit has the goal or mandate of accruing or facilitating wealth for the organization and ultimately for distribution to the owners or the members. Distinct from that is a not-for-profit organization. A not-for-profit is established generally with some underlying purpose other than the generation of profits. In the cooperative world, these are known as community service cooperatives. And I just want to give a little plug that we're actually hosting a webinar on community service cooperatives next week, if you can join us. If assets are accrued by the not-for-profit cooperative, then the articles of incorporation will dictate how those assets are distributed back to the community. Members of a not-for-profit or community service cooperative do not profit from any asset generation. One common misconception is that a not-for-profit cannot generate revenue or be profitable. A not-for-profit can, in fact, generate net profit. The key factor to consider is whether or not the profit will be taxable. So we do know that a not-for-profit can generate profit and establish operating reserves, and they can do that on a tax-free basis. I'm not going to delve deeply into tax laws with respect to the operation of not-for-profits, but by and large, I want to make sure that we dispel the consideration that a not-for-profit cannot generate profits. Last but not least is charitable status, and charitable status must be granted by the Canada Revenue Agency, and there are particular rules that define what your charitable purpose is. The 4 key categories are relief of poverty, advancement of education, the advancement of religion, and other purposes that benefit the community. So those are fairly large brush strokes, but I want to note that any community service cooperative can likely pursue charitable status. There are very specific criteria that accompany this designation, along with strict financial rules, including the requirement for an annual audit. So when you're determining whether or not it is wise or within your mandate to pursue charitable status, it is really important to think about the cost-benefit analysis because there are a number of fairly significant costs associated with achieving charitable status. The CRA has some great information pages on this. One other key point is the ability to issue tax receipts. So a charity can issue an individual tax receipt, whereas a not-for-profit organization cannot. That does not mean that a not-for-profit cannot issue a receipt to another corporation or organization for a contribution to the not-for-profit. So the high notes on that dialogue is that both not-for-profits and charities can operate without paying income tax. And there's an asterisk there because, of course, there are certain exceptions in the not-for-profit realm. Neither type of organizations accrue wealth or assets for the owners. There's the issuance of tax receipts that are specific to charities, and the issuing of regular receipts for corporate contributions. So in all of that information, the key point is to identify what the impact on grant eligibility is. So when you're evaluating grant opportunities, charitable organizations tend to have the very widest access to grant opportunities. Some funds are accessible to both not-for-profit and charities. And certainly there are more limited and fewer opportunities available for for-profit entities. We will touch on it later, but most for-profit entities can only pursue grants that are mandated by the provincial or federal governments that are tied to some specific economic mandate. So the number one tip I want to share with you on eligibility criteria is to think about cooperation. And what's interesting here is many organizations sort of discount their ability to apply for a grant if they do not have charitable status. And what is very important to note is that most grant opportunities will allow for you to partner. So if you are a community service cooperative or otherwise organized not-for-profit, I would encourage you to pursue partnerships with existing charities to explore and expand your grant opportunity and reach. So you can look for potential partners very early in your grant seeking journey. And some really well-established and easy to access partnerships would be, for example, school boards and municipalities. They are often looking for organizations who want to put in the time and do the legwork associated with accessing grant funds and are very happy to share their oversight as a charitable organization to give you access. I will also note that partnership is a great way for newer cooperatives or other organizations to access funding. A lot of times grants will have a criteria that you must be in operation for a year or more to access funding. And by partnering with a longer-term charitable organization, you can also overcome that criteria. So after you've determined that you're eligible, your next important step is to identify the mandate. And that is the mandate with respect to not only the granting organization, but also the mandate of your organization. So a lot of the work that I do in coaching is really helping the team clarify their mission and vision. If you have a very refined elevator pitch and clarity about what it is you're doing and how you're going to do it, that clarity translates into a strong grant application. The next step is to align yourself with programs that share that same objective. So essentially what you're trying to do is figure out, what is this grant or is this money, what problem is it trying to solve? And really taking a strong evaluation of what your organization is trying to do and ensure alignment between those two things. I love to read as much information about an organization that's offering the grant and look at what their key mission, vision, and values are. And if they are tied to the organization that I'm pursuing the grant for, that alignment really becomes transparent when you're writing that application. So do your homework. My other piece of advice, is that you can't fit a square peg in a round hole. So it is very clear from the adjudications perspective that sometimes people are trying to put themselves into the box that the grant is designed to meet, and it's not a good fit. My advice is really take the feedback and look for grants that are very tightly aligned to your mission, vision, and mandate. This alignment will save you a lot of time and energy. Good grant application writing takes a significant amount of time. So if there is a misalignment in values or objectives, I would say you pass and move on to the next. Another important point on aligning values and mandates is to think outside the box. There are a number of successful organizations that may not have an actual defined or public granting program, but most successful organizations do have a community engagement person or division who looks for opportunities to share their wealth and support the community. So I'll refer to a personal example here because that always seems to resonate well with folks. So my own community service cooperative, HeartLinked, serves Indigenous female or female identifying youth from northern communities in Saskatchewan. So by default, I go out and look for grants that are aligned with mental health. But what we've also done is evaluated what organizations are currently working in those northern communities that may not have a defined granting program and have sent them packages as well. And we have recently secured multi-year funding from an organization that does not have a specific grant program, but simply had alignment with the communities that they work in and the clientele that we serve in our community services cooperative. So all of this is to say that, as we look at the materials that you'll want to prepare to submit a strong grant application, there is no reason why those materials can't be packaged and used to explore other relationships and opportunities with organizations other than specific grant programs. So for the rules of engagement, on this note, I think it's really important to try and set your organization apart. So I often refer to Where's Waldo, because grant writing is inherently a very competitive process, and you want to make your application stand out and get noticed. So before we talk about content, I want to address some of the ways that your organization can help set itself apart, particularly with national programs. They will receive a great deal of applications. So finding ways to distinguish yourself is very, very important. So getting noticed, first easy one is if they are offering a webinar or a series of webinars about the application process, enroll, because all of those, they record all of the organizations or have a database of organizations who have enrolled in that offering. If they have a contact person or an email, even if you don't have particular questions, introduce yourself via email or telephone and ask for the opportunity to get feedback. Oh, my cat just walked across my screen. This is really one of those days. We will also encourage you to ask for a meeting. Sometimes I've given the feedback when I've been engaged in grant review processes. If there's one thing that they could add to the application process to make it more robust and ensure strong alignment between grant funders and grant recipients, I say you should have a meeting or an interview. No one knows how to sell your organization better than yourself. And sometimes it's very hard to relay that in a conventional document or a standardized form. So anytime that you have the opportunity to put a face to the application, I encourage you to do that. And then last, but certainly not least, ask for feedback if it's available. So often there are a number of grants that operate on a rotating cycle. If you've applied and have been unsuccessful and that you know there will be another round of grant funding, ask for the opportunity to receive feedback. And often those organizations who are in a rhythm of distributing grant funds on an annual basis are happy to share that feedback. So that's a segue to creating your supporting documentation. So as with all things, you know, I mentioned at the top of the webinar here that if you think of grant applications as similar to applying for financing, you will be very, very well prepared to pursue and be successful at grants. So my number one piece of advice is prepare early. And that's getting your organization essentially what I term to be investment ready. And that is even before you may have identified a grant or that you are aligned with or that you want to apply for. And I give this advice for a couple of reasons. Often, even though there are dates associated with a number of very big popular grants, the federal government will often close grants early if they are fully subscribed before the closing date. And that's really critical because you may be working to prepare and assemble all of your documentation only to find that the grant that you are sort of setting your sights on has been closed before you've had a chance to apply. So that's happened recently in a couple of really big national programs. One of them was the CDAP program, closed very unexpectedly. I had clients sort of mid-application, and the Indigenous Peoples Resiliency Fund was supposed to be open until June 21st, and it has already closed to new intakes. So what should you be preparing in advance to help you get your ducks in a row? So as I mentioned, most grants will have a standard form document for you to fill out. And those would have some unique criteria specific to the grant. But I encourage all organizations, no matter how small, to have a form of business plan prepared. And here at Co-operatives First, we have the Biz Plan Generator that is accessible, free of charge, and it is a great tool to help you assemble and organize your thoughts. If your organization has financial statements, always have those on the ready and accessible, as they will always form part of a significant grant application. If you do not have formal financial statements, the Biz Plan Generator does have financial modeling available. Essentially, what you're trying to do is create a picture of organization, stability, and financial prudent, that you're a prudent fiscal manager. That's what you're trying to portray to the grant evaluators. So what I tell clients all of the time is that grants will always have the ability to attach supporting documents. So having a business plan, even if some of the information is redundant in the form that you're filling out, if you can also attach your business plan that is a more comprehensive, detailed outline of what your organization is all about, that is a critical opportunity to set yourself apart from an applicant who just submits the standardized form. Along with the business plan, if the grant is targeting a project as opposed to operational funding, you'll be required to prepare a project budget separate and apart from the financial statements that you create for your entire organization. So what's important with your project budget is to ensure you reflect all of the contributions that will go into the project. So this includes your in-kind or sweat equity. Volunteer hours have value. And I also suggest that where possible, you include a portion of your operating costs that will go towards supporting that project. Last but not least, in advance of pursuing any grants, you'll want to get letters of support. And this is across the board. This isn't just for organizations who are not-for-profit or charitable. What you want to do is show that your community or that your industry is behind you and supporting this expansion. So look for partner organizations that are perhaps longer in existence in the industry, or who can help bolster your application. Another great example for letters of support are the actual users or the people who will benefit from the successful grant application. So, to refer to our or my own personal experience again with my community service cooperative, there is nothing more persuasive than when the grantor gets to read letters that have been prepared by our participants of our program to say how they've been impacted by the opportunity to participate. So last but certainly not least, we want to make sure we leave lots of time for questions, but I wanted to highlight some resources for finding grants, some tips and tricks to help identify programs that are open and available, to help you pursue some seed funding or project funding to get your organization to the next level. Now, my comment here is that there are a few websites that try and channel or funnel or organize the grants that are available, but it is a rabbit hole. There is no singular website that is going to help you navigate the entire world of grants. As creative as you wanted to be on Google, you will always find something that isn't swept up in a summary website. So be prepared to go down the rabbit hole. The federal website, there are two federal websites. One is sort of the catch-all website. And of course, when we send out a copy of this, you'll have the links in these materials. But essentially, that first website there is for all organization types, and then it funnels you out into social enterprise, for-profit enterprise, and everything in between. Specifically for organizations that are for-profit, there is the Business Benefits Finder. And I recognize that it's a good tool, but it has some challenges. It often matches you with links that are maybe not a perfect alignment. And often many of the programs that they point you to may in fact be closed. So I say I take that with a grain of salt, but it's certainly a good place to start. With respect to not-for-profit or charitable organizations, a great source of information is the Community Foundations of Canada. The Community Foundations of Canada encompasses both federal programming as well as a number of other national philanthropic organizations. So it doesn't just deal with the federal programs, although they often administer them. There are a number of other granting programs on that through that platform as well. As a spin-off to that, local community foundations are also an excellent source of opportunity for grants. Provincial and municipal governments, again, often offer programs to all organizations, meaning for-profit and not-for-profit. But particularly with for-profit organizations, they are generally trying to achieve some more specific economic mandate. I have to give a nod to the co-operators who have some excellent programs. Their community development or their cooperative development program. I encourage every cooperative that I work with to pursue this grant. It is one of the few that allows you to pursue foundational costs such as business planning, website startup, marketing, a number of opportunities for funding that don't exist in many other funding programs. And of course, their community funds are also an awesome program for not-for-profit organizations. If there are any childcare startups on this webinar who we are coaching through your startup program, definitely the community fund would be an awesome resource for you when you think of developing your outdoor or playground space. There are some key Saskatchewan sites that I want to refer you to. And it would be a full day seminar if we went down and identified similar sites in each province. But a really great Saskatchewan site is the Saskatchewan Parks and Recreation site. So they are a little bit out of date, but what is really interesting on that site is they have tried to provide quite a comprehensive summary of all active granting programs in Saskatchewan. So it's really, really excellent. The Community Initiatives Fund, as we talked about earlier, partnership is a really great way to not only bolster your application, but to have a wider reach of access to grant opportunities. And the Community Initiatives Fund is a great opportunity for you to partner with your municipality. Sask Culture has great resources beyond things that are just in Saskatchewan. So for example, they have links to the Council for the Arts and a number of national programs there as well. And one grant that is one of those recurring grants is through Tourism Saskatchewan. And that is a grant program that allows you to plan events for profit and not for profit. So I'm assuming there are also similar mechanisms in other provinces. I also want to take the opportunity to identify, we had talked about not all organizations may have a specific mandated granting program, but most of the major national organizations have a community initiatives division, have particular areas of focus, and have excellent recurring grant opportunities. So Nutrien, their focus is food security. Cameco focuses on mental health. All of the national banks have very lucrative granting opportunities. Credit unions, Canada Post has an excellent grant fund. And there is the MasterCard Foundation, and it's has distributed one of the most significant dollar values in 2023 in Canada. Along the mechanism of thinking outside the box, there are a number of charitable foundations as well. It's very difficult to summarize all of them, but I want to identify a couple of them. The Peter Gilligan Foundation is based in Ontario, but they provide funding nationally as long as you are aligned with their mission, vision, and values. The Jubilee Fund in Manitoba is very, very wide-reaching and an excellent resource. And because childcare is so near and dear to my heart with a lot of my work these days, I wanted to highlight the Mootart Foundation, which serves communities in Alberta and Saskatchewan. So that is the end of our formal presentation. We intentionally wanted to leave a lot of time for dialogue and questions, and really make this more conversational. I know it's difficult with many of us, or the number of us engaged in the webinar, but I would like to turn it over to Kyle to see if there are some questions that we can answer.
Awesome, fabulous. Thanks so much, Cathy. That was really great. And there's good dialogue happening in the chat. And I shared in the chat, and if you scan this QR code, it'll link you to our Co-op Entrepreneurs newsletter. And each quarter in that newsletter, we share a whole bunch of resources for startups, but we also share a list of open grant applications that are a pretty good fit for cooperatives. So if you're interested in receiving that, just follow that QR code and you can sign up. If folks do have questions, please feel free, fire them in the chat. Or do a raise hand. But because I'm hosting, I am going to go ahead and take the first question. Cathy, there are a lot of companies out there that offer things like grant writing support, often for a fee or a percentage. Do you have any experience with those service providers, or would you recommend that kind of service?
I do have some experience with those service providers. So my primary note is that no one knows your organization better than you do. So if you're looking to really connect with the granting body and put your best foot forward, I'm not saying that those organizations wouldn't, but nobody knows your business better than you do. So you should always be the primary source of information. The other advice that we gave in the webinar about preparing in advance, if you have letters of support and a business plan and some of those fundamental building blocks that can apply universally to almost any grant application, it makes the task less onerous. So if you can accomplish some of those things and have them on the ready, certainly you can pursue any grant without professional support. If your manpower just doesn't have the bandwidth to do it, and you can afford that service, certainly it's a great opportunity, but it's not essential.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Cathy. I see we have a question from Kat. Over to you.
Thank you. Sorry, I just got to lower my hand here. So our business is about 1.5 years in, and our funder, which is a social enterprise funder, constantly is like, apply for grants. And it's like, if you've never applied for a grant before, the world of granting writing is totally overwhelming. I don't know where our team should we, I guess my question is, do you have advice in terms of selecting the first grant you apply for? Is it easier to apply for, like I was just thinking when you had the list of examples, we have a credit union. Should we start with a small grant from an organization we have a relationship with? So I guess size, scope, any advice you have for like just your first grant application and who to select would be really helpful.
Awesome. That is a great question. And yes, start small and start with somebody that you have a relationship with. And the main reason you want to do that is because it gives you the opportunity to ask for feedback as well. So grant writing is kind of an art. So it is something that will get easier and more fluid over time. But so getting that feedback from someone that you have a relationship with or an organization that knows you will be really critical. And having some success will also help, because that success ends up compounding. I didn't specifically mention it, but often grantors want to know that they aren't the only one at the table. So they're often looking for who your other contributors are. So you may have, one major backer, you might have personal folks who volunteer, but if you are able to have one small grant secured, then at least you can say, we are also supported by your local credit union. So that ends up building a better platform or base to give assurances to other funders that they can get on board.
Awesome. We have a question from the chat from Leaf. Is there a better time of year to focus on grant writing? Is the grant cycle predictable throughout the year?
That's a great question, because it's very unpredictable. So realistically, so if you're looking in private industry, for example, with sort of the titans of certain industries like the Camicos or, the major banks, all of their granting windows are somewhat tied to their fiscal years. And so everyone's is set differently. The federal government's is unique in the sense that it will be tied to the amount of subscribers to the program. So as I mentioned, they may open something in March and you think it's going to be open until September, but it closes in July because they've already received the number of successful applicants that they think the program can stand. So really there is no set calendar. But what I can advise you to do, if you are an organization that will be heavily reliant on grant funding, most of them repeat on the same annual basis. So you can start to build a diarized calendar that will support, and make your applications a little more fluid and a little easier to manage from year to year.
Awesome. In the chat, Tally asks, what would be the main difference between a business plan, format, style, or content for a nonprofit versus a for-profit?
And that's a great question, because I don't think there is much of a difference. What you're doing and what I work hard with my clients to do is to not make it entirely clinical. What you want is the business plan to tell the story of the problem you're trying to solve. So whether it's for profit and you're bringing a new service to or product into the world that you think is going to solve someone's problem, or whether it's a social enterprise that's going to work on homelessness or mental health, really it's about telling your story in as clear and as a distilled way as possible, and then painting the financial picture of how this organization is going to survive. So that's the key difference. I would say, or that's, really the key to a good business plan. The only difference I would see is that a for-profit entity is going to probably pursue more financing through conventional routes. And then your financial modeling, your financial statements are probably going to have to be a little more in depth to support what a financial institution would require.
Awesome. I think we have a question from Scott.
Thanks, Kyle. I can't find my button down there, so I had to go old school.
I couldn't find my presentation, so
pardon?
I couldn't find my presentation at the top of the meeting, so we're in good spirits here.
Yeah, good company. Have you had any experience with Indigenous Development Bank for working with some of the stuff on reserve? Are they sort of open to that kind of building process or being supporters?
I have not specifically had exposure in that realm, but what I can say is from a very high level perspective, what I've seen developing with respect to funding for Indigenous peoples is that they have become thankfully more comprehensive in the style in which you can submit. So they know not that a standard form isn't always the best way to capture the idea or what the concept is that's in need of support. So I would say that that you have a lot of opportunity, but specifically with respect to the Indigenous bank, like I have not worked specifically with that.
I would note as well, a number of our clients have received grants and financial support from the Indigenous financial institutions, All Nations Trust, SEAF here in Saskatchewan, some of the community futures that operate in Indigenous areas. Those also have a really good mix of loans as well as non-repayable contributions. Yeah. Okay, not seeing anybody else waving or with their hand up and nothing in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and ask another question. A lot of grants require the co-ops provide up to 50% or more of project costs. Any tips or tricks you suggest people keep in mind when articulating their project's contribution?
Absolutely. And there's a couple of key points to that. So that's a great question. I'm glad you raised it, Kyle. Number one is that in-kind and sweat equity have value. So when you are evaluating your own organization's contribution to the project, calculate your man hours, calculate your other contributions, your volunteer contributions, and or any other in-kind items that might come from other supporting organizations. So to be valued as a contribution, it doesn't necessarily need to be a check or a dollar. So make sure you evaluate value and not necessarily the dollars. The other thing that I would note is often when groups are applying for funding for a project, there are very particular rules about what costs can be included and what should be excluded. And you want to sort of ensure that you include an overhead component in all of your project costs. So be mindful of the fact that a project never happens in isolation. It also needs to use the photocopier and participate in the office space and all of those things. So to ensure that you're fiscally prudent and can manage the project well, I would definitely also round up to include the overhead costs that might not be included.
I see a hand raised from Grace. Do you have a question, Grace?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
You bet.
Okay, so my question is related to what you just said, putting down the overhead costs for a grant. So one of the grants that I filled out recently, it said how many volunteer hours are you putting in? And then it calculated there was a calculation for an approximate wage based on minimum wage. And I felt hesitant to put the actual amount because I put lots of hours into building the financial statements. And so I actually lowballed on it because I was like, well, now it looks like we have so much money that we don't need a grant.
No, I think what I think you should think of it in the alternative is that it shows the level of commitment to the organization, particularly if that criteria was what are the volunteer hours. If you have a very, very high number of volunteers and high amount of support, it just further shows that there is buoyancy to the organization and that they can safely invest in you because there is so much volunteer support.
Oh, okay. Oh, I wish I knew that before.
Yeah, don't don't ever hesitate to include the reality, because if you're in that trench and you've been working hard, absolutely reflect that.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome. Question from Asma in the chat. Is registration required for a not-for-profit to be eligible for funding?
So normally, that you would have to be a legal organization. So you can't just be an association. A great opportunity for that is a community service cooperative. But essentially what they're looking for is that you be a legal entity. The other approach would then, of course, be partnering with a charity or a legal entity, and then that your association could be the project manager, for example. But for any granting organization to pay out funds, they need to pay it to an existing legal entity.
Okay. I think we have time for one last question, so we're going to go to Asif. You have a question? The floor is yours.
Hi, Kyle, and Cathy. Hello, Cathy. So my question is that, I basically created a website and I put my business plan more or less as guideline on the website. When you get these grant, is it application that you fill up a form, or is it more like a essay format that you write it out, your business plan?
Most of the time it's a form. So you will have to go out and seek organizations that have grant opportunities posted. Then you would fill out the form. If you have a business plan, those grant applications always allow you to attach supplemental materials. So after you've filled out the form, they always give you an opportunity to say, would you like to attach additional information? In which case I tell people, always say yes. It's the opportunity to differentiate yourself. And that's where, after filling out sort of the standard form, you would attach your business plan and or any letters of support that you feel are relevant to that particular grant application.
And how much information do you actually put in your business plan? Like, do you have to go like A to Z, or do you give it more like an executive summary and then they follow through with more details?
Well, that's a great question, because I think historically business plans used to be evaluated based on weight. If it was a 70-page business plan, then it must be very good. And I really am from a different school of thought. It's about hitting the high notes and not being paid by the word. In my legal profession, I worked with a lot of folks who I thought were paid by the word. So what you want to do is give enough information to show the stability, the focus, the mission and mandate of the organization, and the financial information that will give enough information for the funder to acknowledge that you're fiscally prudent and that there's longevity to the organization. Does it need to be 40 pages? No, it doesn't, but you want to be sure it tells your whole story.
Okay. That's the way I look at it. Since you have a law degree, I'm sure that you get paid by the words that you use. My education, original one, was in architecture. So for me, everything that is on a drawing is pretty self-explanatory. But I find lately that I have to answer a lot of questions about a lot of little details. So when I'm doing the business plan, do I actually say that each one of these items costs so much money and creates so much detail? And
No, and I don't think, and that's particularly more with respect to your accounting. I always say, what's material? So look at the total dollar values that you're working with in your business plan. And if it's $1 million organization, you probably don't need to report buying lead for the pencils, if you know what I mean. So it's about what is the material information that you're trying to convey. It's not about, all of the minuscule details. You'll lose people in that.
so, for example, if my house is like a house that shows washer, dryer, dishwasher, I don't have to break down every little item. I can just say that this house with all this stuff in it is $150,000 or $200,000.
Sure, that's a great analogy.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Oh, I think you're muted, Kyle.
Sorry, I was typing a response to somebody, and so I was like, didn't want to with my typing. That brings us to the end of today's session, and I want to thank everybody for attending and those who asked questions, and a special thanks to our entrepreneur in residence, Cathy, for joining us. It was a fabulous presentation. I'll be in touch with everyone over the next week or so with this session's recording, but you can feel free to reach out to us anytime if you're interested in learning more about co-ops, or if you'd like to set up a new cooperative business. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.